Hello and welcome to our special edition of Africa Today. As in this edition of our program, we will focus on Egyptian-Japanese relations. President Fattah al-Sisi and visiting Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met in Cairo on Sunday. Presidential spokesman Councillor Ahmed Fahmy said the talks in Egypt tackle means of boosting bilateral ties and peace and security on international and regional levels. A joint press conference follows the talks in Cairo. And to shed more light on Egyptian-Japanese relations and the importance of this visit by the Japanese Prime Minister, the first to the region, we are joined over the phone by Ambassador. Good afternoon, Ambassador.
Good afternoon, madam.
So, sir, how would you describe cooperation between Japan and Africa?
Well, I guess Japan has shown great interest in deepening its relation with Africa, particularly the leading African powers, among which, of course, is Egypt. And this trip is the first one by the Japanese Prime Minister since his election last year.
Yes.
And it comes before Japan hosting the next summit, the G7 summit in Hiroshima next month. So I guess this tour that would take the Prime Minister of Japan to Egypt and some other 4 African countries, that comes before this important summit of the G7. And of course, it's a chance for the Prime Minister to listen firsthand from African leaders, among them, of course, Egypt President al-Sisi, to speak about their points of view concerning Africa, the needs of Africa, and the impact of the insecurity and instability in the international system caused by the war in Ukraine on Africa. So I guess the visit and the tour of the Japanese Prime Minister leads us to believe that Japan would play during its presidency of the group of 7 countries, would play a positive role in furthering African positions on the international scene.
So, Ambassador Hussein Hareedy, former Assistant Foreign Minister, how do you weigh the timing of the visit by the Japanese Prime Minister to Africa and choosing Egypt to be his first leg?
Well, of course, choosing Egypt is the gateway. From an Asian point of view, it's the gateway to Africa. Has always been from a historical point of view. So I guess, and of course, the visit comes in the context of the very good relations that have existed and have linked Japan and Egypt since ages. And I guess the article that was written by the Japanese Prime Minister and was published by Egyptian newspapers today, this article shows how much important is Egypt from a Japanese point of view. And of course, in this article, the Japanese Prime Minister, Mr. Kishida, has outlined the promising areas of cooperation between the 2 countries on the one hand, and on the other hand, Egypt and Japan working together in furthering peace and international peace and security, particularly in the Indo-Pacific and in Africa and the Middle East.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, Japan has pledged $30 billion investment in Africa and is to provide co-financing of up to $5 billion together with the AFDB to improve the lives of Africans. How do you see the Japanese interest in African countries as we have seen in the past few years, Chinese interest in Africa and its presence?
Well, of course, this is it's an impressive amount for an industrialized country to invest in Africa. And of course, Africa needs foreign direct investments. And one of the problems facing African countries is the high debts, foreign debts for some African countries. And I guess during this tour, the African leaders who would meet with the Japanese Prime Minister would bring this question on the agenda of their talks with him. And I guess that the fact that Japan would host the next G7 summit next May, that, of course, is a little bit promising in the sense that Japan would maybe include on the agenda of the summit the alleviation and or the scheduling of African foreign debt.
Yes, sir, as we go back to Egypt and Japan, how do you see the different fields of cooperation between the two countries and the prospects of attracting more Japanese investors to Egypt?
Well, as outlined in the article of Japan's Prime Minister, I guess the areas of cooperation vary extend from education, culture, energy, transport. Really, the bilateral relations between Japan and Egypt do cover major areas of cooperation among the countries. And of course, the Japanese investments in Egypt are substantial, but of course, there is always room to increase these investments.
Yes. Also, sir, if we talk about cooperation in the field of education, as we have seen that we have many Japanese schools opening here in Egypt, and Japanese programs are implemented in many schools.
Well, of course, in the Japanese schools in Egypt, there are already 10,000 Egyptian students following Japanese and Egyptian curricula. And on the other hand, there is a science and technology university, Japanese Egyptian Science and Technology University.
Yes.
But I guess we have to show greater interest in teaching the Japanese language in our schools, the Japanese language and the Chinese language.
Yes.
So we have 10,000 students studying in the Japanese schools in Egypt. This number is promising, but it could grow because the Egyptian public opinion believes in the Japanese system of education.
Yes, I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Hussein Hareedy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And back to our reports and more about Japanese investments here in Egypt as it has witnessed